All right, let's get started on civil procedure. This is something that, again, much like our lecture on Monday, is really a semester-long course. This is something that you take during your first year of law school. It is actually 2 semesters. So this lasts your entire first year of law school, where you will go over personal jurisdiction, subject matter jurisdiction, how to file a claim, and the rules that go along with that. Really, what we're going to do today is just a super condensed version of a year-long class, enough so that you understand the basic mechanics of how our legal system works. And that really is a good definition of civil procedure. If you want to file a claim, which courthouse should you go to? And which documents do you file with that court to initiate the claim? For our purposes, that's what this is really all about. So with that in mind, I'm going to share some slides here and we can get started. So, all right. So what you're seeing on the screen right now deals with jurisdiction. And jurisdiction, you've heard this your whole life. Usually you see this on cop shows. The FBI shows up and a local police department shows up and they argue about who has jurisdiction over this case. That's another use of jurisdiction. What we're going to really be talking about now is, does the court have the authority to hear this specific dispute? That's jurisdiction for our purposes. So in the eyes of the court, does the court have the authority to hear a case? And to figure out if a court has jurisdiction, we're going to look at a number of these elements right here. And really kind of personal jurisdiction, this deals with minimum contacts. And the idea there is, do the individuals, do the parties, the businesses involved in the lawsuit, do they have minimum contacts with that jurisdiction? So if it's a state court, is a business that's getting sued, does that business have minimum contacts, meaning an office space? Does it have, does it make money? Is it headquartered in that specific state? And remember this word, it's not a lot of contacts, it's not substantial contacts, it's just minimum contacts. Does it have a minimum presence in that state? And if it does, yep, we're going to check that off the list. Personal jurisdiction is met. Now the second one here is going to be quite a bit more involved. Subject matter jurisdiction involves whether or not the court can hear the case based on a number of different factors. And let's just kind of hold it right now for subject matter jurisdiction, because subsequent slides discuss that. But just know that this one's more involved and endlessly fun to test on. Okay, venue and standing. Again, those two we'll talk about as well. But venue just means, like, sure, it's in the state court, but which state court? Every state has many state courthouses scattered throughout the state. So which state court is the best one to use? That's venue. And of course, standing just means the person that's suing for damages was actually damaged, was injured in some way. And so again, that I think this slide is just a good kind of introduction to these other elements that we'll be talking about. Okay, so now we get into subject matter jurisdiction. And the way to look at this is that there's 2 ways to get into court using the subject matter jurisdiction. And at this stage, I think because you have this slide with you anyway, I'm going to do something different. I'm going to share a whiteboard here so that I can kind of show you how this is going to work. Okay, so remember that whether or not you're going to end up in court, you've got to have jurisdiction, and you have to have personal jurisdiction and subject matter jurisdiction. So let's write this out. 1, And these are requirements here. You need personal jurisdiction. And just remember that's the minimum contacts. Is there a minimum contact with the state? If so, you check that one off. This is relatively easy for our purposes. But 2 is what we call subject matter jurisdiction. and yeah, let me do something real quick here. So you need personal jurisdiction and subject matter jurisdiction. All right, within subject matter jurisdiction, the first element that we're going to need in federal court. All right, this is incredibly important. Just remember that we are only talking about federal court here. And to make this abundantly clear, I'm going to kind of start this over again. So I'm going to call this jurisdiction in federal court. And we'll talk about state courts in a little bit, but you'll see state courts will pretty much take anybody. Federal courts are a little different. So again, jurisdiction in federal court, obviously number 1, we need personal jurisdiction and subject matter jurisdiction. All right, so now we're kind of back to where we were with the clarification that we're talking about federal court. All right, so within subject matter jurisdiction, the first thing that we're going to look at is federal question. And really what this means, as you know from the reading, is that if you want to end up in federal court, if you're suing over a federal law, you can go to federal court, no matter what. If you're suing because somebody is violating copyright law, for example, like somebody's infringing on your copyright, well, that is a federal law passed by Congress. Why? Because the Constitution gives the authority to the federal legislature to pass laws about copyright, and they have, so that's a federal law, not a state law. So again, go straight to federal court. All right, so again, and to help you kind of understand this, it can be a federal question, or B, here we're going to have diversity jurisdiction. Okay, just for clarification's sake. All right, so if you have diversity jurisdiction, then you can go to the federal courthouse. All right, now here's where we have a couple different things that you need to look at. Diversity jurisdiction, just so you know, this typically just means that the different parties to the lawsuit are residents of different states. Okay, and we look at, like, do all the plaintiffs, are their place of residence different than all the defendants? And if you have just 2 parties, and I'm just going to test you with 2 parties, you make sure that the plaintiff and the defendant are residents of different states. Now, this gets a little complicated with businesses because a business can have multiple residences of different states, but look, let's just keep this simple. 2 different people from 2 different states. That's usually what you're looking about. So looking at or looking for. So here I'm going to write this down. So sub I, different states. Okay, and I can do this too. And so different states, and the amount that we call it the amount of what do we call it? The dollar amount in controversy exceeds $75,000. So I'm just going to do this. Exceeds $75,000, meaning it has to be $75,000.01. Okay. All right. let me put this all together now that you're seeing this on your screen, right? Personal jurisdiction, always required. So you need personal jurisdiction and subject matter jurisdiction. To get your subject matter jurisdiction, you can do that either by suing based on a federal law, what we call federal question. And on the exam, just so you know, I'm not going to like try to trick you and have some like John sues Sally for maritime law, and then I'm not going to expect you to like go figure out if this specific maritime law is a federal law or whatever. I'm going to tell you, like John sues Sally based on the federal patent law of whatever infringement or something. All right, I'm going to make it very clear to you if federal question is involved. Okay, so you can get your subject matter jurisdiction either by suing based on federal law or the diversity jurisdiction, meaning that the parties are from different states and the amount in controversy is greater than $75,000. Right? Save this right here. Like come back to this video when you're taking the exam, for example, and or just write this out and have it ready, because when you are going through the exam, I want you just to be like walking through it and being like, okay, we've got personal jurisdiction. Let's check about subject matter jurisdiction. There's no federal questions, so I can't do that. But let's see. Oh, they are from different states, and the amount of controversy is greater. They're suing for $100,000. So yeah, we've got subject matter jurisdiction. I want you to be able to just kind of check this off as you go through. Make it simple like that. Again, I'm not expecting you to memorize this and go into the exam knowing all of this. That's called the bar exam. Don't worry about that. For 95% of you, you'll never have to worry about the bar exam. This is just, it shows me that you can take the facts of the case and analyze them according to jurisdictional laws. All right, so that is jurisdiction in federal court. I will, on the exam, this is a test alert, I will give you a situation where John is suing Sally in state court, and then talk about how they're from different states and the amount of controversy is $100,000 or whatever. And you may very well start working on this screen right here. Don't do that. Don't fall for that. If it's state court, you're not going to use this list, okay? In state court, let me show you this. So if we're talking about jurisdiction, state court, it's going to be just a little different. Do you still need personal jurisdiction? Yeah, like you need to, the person needs to have some minimum contact with that courthouse, with that state courthouse, for example. And two, subject matter jurisdiction. Here's the deal with state courts. They have subject matter jurisdiction over a lot of things, unless it's exclusive to federal courts. And for this, just go back to the reading and you see the image with the two circles of state court and federal court and the overlapping. State courts, think of it as kind of like the state court is like what's left over. How do I say this? It's just the courthouse that'll take anything pretty much. All right. You may have the option to go to federal court, but you might not want to. So you'll bring the case in state court, and that's okay. You can do that. The state court can hear those cases. Now you may be wondering, like, what if it's an exclusive federal court situation? Well, yeah, those have to end up in federal court. Like if it's a bankruptcy case, for example, those always have to go to federal court. But maybe you're suing somebody based on, you know, a federal, it could be a federal crime, but a lot of the federal, or not crime, a wrong, but a lot of those are also state wrongs. So you could bring the same lawsuit in the state court. And to maybe help you kind of understand this, what I found is that a lot of people have what some consider an erroneous view, that federal courts are better than state courts. Now, it's in like I don't know exactly where this came from, but I think there's an image issue that state courts have to deal with. So if you go to downtown Rexburg, so like where Walgreens is, that kind of intersection right there, well, that's the state courthouse just across the street from Walgreens. And it looks horrible. I'm going to be honest. It's this terrible place, right? Like I've been in there a number of times, and hardly anybody's in there most of the time, and it's just dark and smells funny, and it's old, sure, but it's, yeah, it's just a horrible little place. It's also the building that has inexplicably has Christmas lights on it year round. Yeah, in July, it's weird to go by a building and the courthouse still has Christmas lights up, but whatever. Whereas contrast that with the state courthouse, or sorry, the federal courthouse, and the nearest federal courthouse to us here in Rexburg is down in Pocatello. And that whole thing is like marble, the whole, Greek columns, all of that. You walk in and you just feel like, yeah, this is better than what we have in Rexburg. And federal courthouses get more money. The judges are paid a lot more money. Usually the big cases are heard in federal court as well. So like add all of that up, and I think people just have this idea that it's more prestigious to be in federal court or something. Federal judges, by the way, are appointed, and state judges in Idaho and a lot of states, they're elected, and that's kind of seen as unseemly a little bit, like running for to be a judge, just kind of odd. But in any case, it's just interesting. Like go into the Rexburg courthouse and compare that when you take next time you're in Pocatello, and you'll see there's a massive difference between state courts and federal courts. Okay, now let's see here. Let's jump back into our slides now that you understand a little bit more about jurisdiction. Go back into Safari here. Okay, so again, with all courts, you've got to look at jurisdiction. Just our analysis is different. Remember, state courts will take. Okay, it's a little bigger. Okay, so let's move on. This image, I hope you get a kick out of it. The next slide, I'm going to talk about a hypothetical question, and it deals with jurisdiction between Idaho and Florida. Right now, I want to give you an example that will kind of make all of this real, make it make sense to you. And so I Googled images. I went to Google Images and I just put in Idaho and Florida. And I wanted to basically just get an image with the two states, but this was the first thing that popped up, and I thought, why not? So, all right, here we go. Here is the scenario. You are about to get attacked by me. All right. If you didn't know this, I moved here from Florida to start working at the university. So, and also to help this make sense, Florida is known for having crazy people, and so you'll see this if you're following me on Twitter and the legal issues that I'm putting out. Oftentimes, just for kicks, I will link to an article about a Florida man, and the joke is, I think this got started on Reddit or something. If you read news stories and it starts with Florida man, there's just going to be like some crazy story going on. My all-time favorite was Florida man arrested for throwing alligators into the window of the McDonald's drive-thru, right? Like, what? But of course, that's just like just every Saturday night in Florida, somebody's doing that. Not really. The interesting thing here is, like, some students are like, is everybody this nuts in Florida? And the answer is no, not really. Like, it's an average state, but I should say Florida's laws mean that arrest records are public record, meaning if any news outlet across the country is ever having a slow news day, they can always just like call up any police department or courthouse or whatever and get access to unlimited numbers of stories and arrest records and all of that. So um, I think it's because of Florida's openness, you will see that like a lot of crazy stories come out of Florida. Now, one that happened while I was there, I was driving into Miami to go to court, and I was driving down to the courthouse in Miami, and I was listening to the news, and they said, everybody get out of downtown Miami. There is a man that has stripped himself naked and is running around attacking people and eating them. I was like, what? Like that was just the most Florida thing I'd ever heard. Um, and it was true, like for a while. And this happened a couple weeks in a row where these people were using some kind of drug, and it just made them lose their mind completely, and they became cannibals. So again, Florida men. All right. So I lived in Florida for 5 years, so I'm going to claim Florida man status right now. And here it is, Attack of the Florida Man. So you're in the crossroads back when we used to be around each other, and just eating lunch. And here I come with, of course, an alligator. And I throw it at you. It lands, it bites at your hair and freaks you out so much um, that you pass out or whatever. Wake up in the hospital, and it's time. You've suffered an injury, obviously. It's time to sue Brother Hales. So the question is, where are you going to sue me? So again, this question here at the bottom of the slide: where do you bring your lawsuit against me? Can you sue me in Florida? Well, I've run from the law. I've run back to Florida. Can you sue me in Florida? Yeah, you bet. That's where I am. Does are there minimum contacts over me in Florida if that's where I'm living? Always, like always. Now you may be wondering, like, well, are there minimum contacts over me? Remember that this analysis is over the defendant, the person that you're suing has to have minimum contacts. If you go to Florida to sue me, then of course you obviously have minimum contacts. You went there and elected that state courthouse, or perhaps a federal courthouse to sue me in the state of Florida. So yeah, there's minimum contacts over you because you agreed to it by filing the lawsuit. You see what I'm saying? And there's obviously minimum contacts over me because that's where I live, right? Now, you may not want to do that. So some of you are like, why would I do? I don't want to go to Florida to sue Brother Hales. All right, perfect. Now let's start doing the analysis in Idaho. Are there minimum contacts over me in Idaho? Well, think about it. I was there. I threw an alligator on you in Florida. I lived there and currently do live here in Idaho. I probably owned a house and property, and my job was in Idaho. Does that satisfy this term minimum contacts? Well, of course. It's like minimum isn't that much, and I've got a lot. I've got a lot of contacts with Idaho. So can you sue me in Idaho? Absolutely, absolutely. File the lawsuit here in Rexburg in the state court, or down in Pocatello if you want to do the federal courthouse. We'll get to that in a second. And yeah, you've definitely got minimum contacts, and I'm going to have to show up back in Idaho to defend myself. Otherwise, you could just get a summary judgment against me and win because I didn't show up and I had minimum contacts with the state. So, all right, minimum contacts, check. All right, now let's move down to subject matter jurisdiction. And remember, subject matter jurisdiction for our purposes deals with federal courthouses. So you're suing me in the federal court down in Pocatello. Can you do that? All right, so let's go through it. Is it based on a federal law? Well, not really. Like maybe terrorism. That actually might work. You might have a federal claim of terrorism against me. But let's say that you didn't. Let's say it was just assault and battery, right? These are state law claims for the harmful touching of somebody else. We'll talk about this next week when we get to torts. But again, assault and battery, you've heard these words before. It just means harmful touching. right? Did I do that? Yeah, I threw an alligator at you. That's like the definition of assault and battery. So that's a state law claim. So let's say that you don't have a federal law that you're suing me based on, and you're just doing state law. Well, without that federal question jurisdiction, remember there was an or right beneath it. So we're going to jump down to diversity jurisdiction. And do we meet that? Well, kind of, like maybe, probably. It depends, right? We need more information. Are you and I now residents of different states? Yeah. If I moved back to Florida and I'm now a resident of Florida and you're a resident of Idaho, we are residents of two different states. And there's the amount in controversy. Are you suing me for more than $75,000? Well, yeah, I'm guessing you are. You're probably suing me for $1 million. Why? Because if you had to spend, again, in this question, you wake up in the hospital and find that I've returned to Florida. I'm guessing you've been in the hospital for a while. And if you spend more than like 2 nights in a hospital anywhere in the US, because our healthcare, we spend more on healthcare than any other country by far, right? So if you spend 2 nights in the hospital, you're going to get a bill for like 100 grand, just telling you right now. And then you're going to add on other claims like emotional distress and all of this other stuff. And as a result, you're going to sue me for much more than $75,000. So do we have diversity jurisdiction? Yeah. Yep. Subject matter jurisdiction is good. Why? Because we are residents of 2 different states and you're suing me for more than $75,000. All right. So there, now you know, you can sue me either in Idaho or in Florida. And I think that's a good, just kind of walk through that in your own mind right now. Go ahead and pause the video. Just make sure that you understand that. Go back to that drawing that I had up on the screen a second ago with all the ors and the ands. You'll be fine with this, okay? All right, let's go on to the next one. So this next slide, let me make sure, yep. So this next slide is kind of a fun story that I like to tell my sections every semester. And this was a real case. This happened to me. We're probably coming up on like 5 years ago. No, goodness, like 10 years ago. So I was corporate counsel, meaning I represented a business. We'll call it Vacation Corp. This was a corporation headquartered in New Hampshire, but its main offices were in Orlando, where I was. So I was the attorney for the business. And what happened is my boss one day, and I was new when this happened. I was like, first time representing a business, kind of a cool thing, right? And just kind of enjoying my job. And my boss walks in and throws this file on my desk and says, "Fix it," and then walks out. So I'm like, okay, here we go. Like, first big case. So I open up this file. It wasn't very big. But what happened is the business was getting sued by a guy out of Michigan. And this is interesting. Like these facts are interesting. So what happened is the business, Vacation Corp, that I represented, it would advertise online that it would help people with issues, primarily around their vacation properties. And then if anybody saw the ad, they could call in to the company, and the call center was in Orlando. So people would call in, ask for help, and if they wanted to, they would hire our company and go forward and help them. Well, what happened was this guy put in his like on one of those online forums. He said, "My name's John Smith. Here's my number. Give me a call," basically. And then the company started calling him over and over again. He would never answer. And so after like 5 to 10 tries or something, they're like, "No, we give up." And they took him off the list and didn't call him again. And it was about a month after that he sued the company in Michigan, claiming violations of a federal law, the Do Not Call Registry. That's what this DNC Act is. It's the Do Not Call Act. Basically, and this is a federal law, by the way, some of my students don't know this. It is a federal law that you can't call to solicit somebody if they have put their name and number on the Do Not Call registry. This is a federal registry. If you just Google Do Not Call registry, scroll down so you get past all the ads, and down at the bottom you'll see a .gov, um, and then you go there, input your name and your phone number, and then voila, you don't have to worry about solicitation calls anymore. Kind of like some of you are laughing because scammers, they don't care, right? Like scammers will still call you, but like a lot of the legitimate solicitation call center type of businesses, they won't call you anymore. Why? Because federal law mandates that they subscribe to the do not call registry and that they remove numbers of individuals in the US who have listed their name and number. This works for house phones and cell phones because nobody has house phones anymore. What am I talking about? So again, this guy put his name on the do not call registry. Our call center called him 5 times, and so he sued. All right, so again, my only instruction was fix this. So I got looking into it, and I figured out something fairly quickly that you, like half of you, have already figured out. The do not call registry doesn't apply if you ask somebody to call you. Okay, like this is simple stuff. Our call center wasn't just making random solicitations to Americans. They would only call people that had requested that we call them. So there was no need for us to have any involvement with the do not call registry. And what we did was not a violation of the do not call registry. But the question is, how do we get rid of this case now? All right. So yeah, we could hire an attorney to represent it because I wasn't licensed to practice in Michigan. None of the other attorneys at the firm were. So my first thought was, let me call an attorney it was in Detroit. So I started calling attorneys in Detroit to try to get this lawsuit dismissed. Why? Because we didn't violate the law. It's going to be a fairly simple motion. And what we do is we file a piece of paper with the court that says motion to dismiss. The plaintiff can't prove his case because we have records of him asking us to call him back, basically. So no, judge, we didn't violate the do not call act. All right. But that's expensive. So I called an attorney, said, yeah, I'll do that. It'll probably be about $5,000. And here's how you can send the money to me. And then I'll get started on your case. And to the business itself, like the business could write a check for $5,000 to get this thing taken care of. But I thought, there's got to be a better way than this. So I started doing some digging, and I found out that this guy who had sued us, this is all that he did. This was his job, right? So he would go into many different businesses across America, input his name and number, wait for them to call him. He'd keep track of it because he used a Google number, and so he could like pull up a document that showed every time somebody had called him and from what number and what business and whatever. So so he would do that, and then he'd just wait for people to call about 5 to 10 times, print off that document, file a lawsuit in state court. The state court was like a couple blocks from his house, basically. He wasn't doing this in federal court. He was doing it in state court. All right, so I realized what was going on here, and I thought, this is fishy. And sure enough, like I said, I found that he was doing this to lots of other businesses. And it looked like all of the other businesses were just settling with him. Why? Because they did exactly what I did. When they're like, this guy isn't, he doesn't have a claim. But if we hire an attorney to get this claim dismissed, it's going to be about $5,000. Why don't we just pay the guy off? And so it looked like he was just taking settlements, right? So, and this was actually my first thought when I saw it was going to be $5,000 to go get rid of this lawsuit. I was like, maybe I'll just offer him a few grand and see if he goes away. Right. And that's what he was banking on. And that's what he was doing. And this is how he made probably $10,000 a month, was just doing this. It was so stupid. So anyway, I called him up. He wouldn't talk to me. He said he had an attorney. So I called up the attorney. Turns out it wasn't even an attorney. But he put himself out as an attorney, which is against the law as well. But you'll see how I use all of this. And so I called up the quote unquote attorney, and I said, look, like, I see that your client is committing fraud. And this is the definition of wire fraud, basically. Um, um, Trying to extort money from businesses with bogus legal claims, using wires that cross interstate. Hold on to wire fraud. We talk about that next week when we get to crimes. But yeah, basically just saying your client is committing fraud. So I'm going to bring a lawsuit against your client, is what I said. I was like, I'm not going to pay you a penny, but I'm coming after you. This is a big deal. And the attorney, he said, okay, let me get back to you. And he hung up. Well, then I started Googling this guy and found out he wasn't even an attorney. So I called him back and I'm like, hey, and by the way, you're not an attorney. What's going on here? And at that point he said, okay, how much do you want? so so at that point I was able to negotiate with this other party. And imagine my boss's surprise. So the company that I represent, they handed me this file and told me to fix it, and I think their plan was to spend like $5,000 to make it go away or whatever. Imagine their surprise when I come back with the file and I say, this is taken care of. Oh, and by the way, they paid us a couple grand not to sue them, right? Like I got some serious brownie points out of this. And why? It was because there's issues here dealing with jurisdiction. But more than that, like, don't get caught up on like, oh, do they even have jurisdiction of us? Like do that analysis, but also take the time to step back and say, is this right? Like, should we settle, and think more big picture? And once you can start to do that, then I think you're going to be a great attorney or analyst, or heaven forbid, accountant. Um, why? Because you're thinking outside the box a little bit. And this was one of those early experiences that I had that it's kind of a fun story to share. All right. So next question that a lot of you have is like, well, what if I start an online business? Where is my jurisdiction? What state am I a resident of? Because a lot of our laws about jurisdiction, they're based on the this ancient assumption that businesses have brick and mortar stores, and more that's less true. And so here's the deal. Like, if you are running an online business and selling products, that you take orders online and then you mail it out, do you have jurisdiction? Is there jurisdiction over you in the state that you're operating in? Well, of course, like, that's obvious, right? You live there. Is there jurisdiction over you in the state where your business is registered to do business? Of course. And usually that's the state where you live. Although you may choose Delaware, but we'll talk about that later. So my law firm, for example, is an Idaho law firm. I'm located in Idaho. I'm also licensed in Florida, but I don't have an office there. But my law firm is mostly internet based. Like, it's a virtual law firm to some extent, meaning that I don't have a brick and mortar office. Now, when we first moved here, I did downtown Rexburg. I rented a space out, and that's where I put my law firm. And then I just realized that was a complete waste of money. My clients tend to be on the East Coast, and they don't care if I have an office, a nice office or a garbage office. Like, they don't even care. So now I do most of my legal work from my office on campus or at home, and I have a PO box when people need to mail me things. So that's the new reality for a lot of people. And it's actually interesting with the COVID-19, people have been advised not to go into work, and law firms and consulting companies and accounting offices are now like, this isn't so bad. Like, why did we have that super expensive downtown office, or heaven forbid it, like a Manhattan, New York office, when we can all work from home? Like, why don't we save $16 million a year by not doing that? And so it's kind of interesting to see commercial real estate, kind of the changes that are happening there. But in any case, my law firm, is there jurisdiction over me in Idaho? Yes. What if, let's say that I take on a client in New York and I mess something up? I commit legal malpractice. Can they sue me in New York? Well, this gets interesting, right? Like I took a client on in New York, but the question becomes, do I have minimum contacts with the state of New York? Is the fact that I had one client in New York enough to establish minimum contacts? And the answer is probably not. But there are ways that we can show that maybe I did. So what if I advertise extensively in New York? Meaning when I go to do my Google ads, I say target New York, put all my money on New York in this demographic in this area of New York. Now do they have personal jurisdiction over me? Well, it looks like it, right? Like I targeted New York. So now can they sue me in New York? Probably. Whereas before, if I just put generic Google ads for all of America and say, yeah, $10 a day is all I'm willing to pay in Google ads, and somebody in Wichita hires me to help them with a contract issue, can they then sue me in Wichita? No, no. But if I target my ads for Wichita or Kansas, Wichita's in Kansas, I think. In that case, yes, they can sue me then. All right, so that's kind of the purpose of this slide, is just so that you're aware that when you start your online business selling dog toys or hair bands or whatever it is, there may be jurisdiction over you if you targeted that state. Okay, even though your online business is based out of your dorm room in Utah. All right, so that's kind of the key with this one. And this is kind of changing, but for our purposes, we're making it that simple. Again, you're not in law school, so let's not worry about it. Now, the website's terms and conditions, this is kind of interesting, and sometimes I'll pull up my law firm's website and show you my terms and conditions, because I say, if you hire me, you consent to the exclusive jurisdiction of Idaho courts. Why do I put that in there? Because I don't want to have to go to New York to defend myself in a lawsuit against a client who thinks that I wronged him or her. Is it binding? Is that going to hold up in court? Maybe not, but it's worth a shot. It's kind of like the state telling Idahoans right now to wear cloth masks when they go outside. Does it help? Not much, but it might. So wear it. Okay, there we go. All right, so that's jurisdiction in cyberspace, kind of internet law. But yeah, I think that's important because, like I said at the beginning of the semester, chances are a lot of you will start little side gigs, and usually those are online. Okay, so we've talked about jurisdiction. Let's put that behind us and move on to venue. Venue, like I said at the beginning of class today, it's just there's 50 state courts in the state of Idaho. Which one of those, now that we know that we have jurisdiction in Idaho, which state court should we sue in? Or federal court? There's, what are there, like 3 or 4 or 5 federal courts in the state of Idaho. What is the best federal court to file our lawsuit in? And for that one, this is simple. Like, what's the closest area to where the injury happened? If I infringed on your federal copyright and you want to sue me in federal court, well, you're just going to, you're going to do it in the federal courthouse closest to us both. Let's not complicate this. Like, what if the plaintiff is in northern Idaho and the defendant is in southern Idaho? Like, let's not worry about that. Just look at where the injury happened and find the closest courthouse to that location. This is true federal or state. All right. All right, now we get to standing. Again, standing I think is incredibly important. And to understand this, let's just jump down straight to this example. One of my favorite places in the world is Cookie Place. I love the Cookie Place and I love Crumble. I might like one of them more than the other, but I love eating cookies, and it's one of the joys of my life, eating like warm, gooey cookies. Now, my wife doesn't like that. She wants them cooked all the way through. That's just weird. Like, they're better the way that Cookie Place does them, where they're kind of gooey in the middle, right? So let's say that I go there every day, and until the Cookie Place falls victim to the infamous arsonist Astrid. So Astrid burns down the Cookie Place. Well, shoot, I'm mad, right? Because I show up the next day to get my cookie. Well, 4 cookies because they don't let you buy one. Anyway, I show up to buy my box of cookies and it's burned down. And I read East Idaho News and find out that Astrid's been arrested for burning it down. And I'm so mad that I bring a lawsuit against Astrid. And the question is, can I do that? The question is, can I do that? And as you read about standing, you have to be the one that suffered the injury to bring the lawsuit. Well, my argument is what? I suffered an injury. I like cookies. I can't eat cookies anymore. That's harming my psyche. Astrid, you're going to court. I'm taking you to court, civilly, right? Well, meaning in civil court as opposed to criminal court, but whatever. You remember that. So, can I do that? And the answer is, well, I'll just tell you. The answer is no. It wasn't my store that she burned down. Sure, I liked it, but I like a lot of things. I like flowers and gardens and running. You know, can I sue anybody that cuts a flower? Well, of course not. Now this kind of ticks off the tree people because they want to sue anybody that cuts down a tree, right? But if it wasn't their tree, then they probably can't bring a lawsuit against the person that cut down the tree. So now they can if it was on public land and they represent the public, whatever. That's a side story. You don't need to worry about that. But in this story, I can't bring this lawsuit because it wasn't my store that Astrid burned down. Now, can the owners of the cookie place bring the lawsuit? You bet, and they will. But me, as a lover, as a connoisseur of cookies, I just can't. All right, so look for that on the exam. The exam questions look a lot like the Astrid example. Conflict of state laws. Let me just introduce this. I'm not going to test on it, but the question comes up often, like every state has different laws to some extent. I mean, most of the state laws are about the same. The major ones are going to be the same. But we talked about this week with drug law, like marijuana laws. Those are different between here and Colorado. And so what happens when maybe you enter into a contract with somebody and either analyzing the breach of contract or remedies or whatever, but like whether you apply Colorado law or Idaho law is going to affect the way that this case turns out. Which state's laws do you use? And again, this is kind of a tough one, and I'll tell you now what I'm going to tell you a lot through this semester, and what a lot of attorneys say. It depends. It depends on where the contract was signed. If the contract says Colorado law will govern this contract, it depends on a lot of things. And the case that we have for Friday deals with this thing exactly. So, I just want you to know that this can be an issue. And so I want you to be careful when you enter into agreements that you look for a jurisdictional clause that says, one says this state law applies, and two, if there's a lawsuit, it will be brought in this state. Just look for that. Okay. And then here, taking a case to court. What I need you to know here is what students mess up all the time somehow. Okay, come here. As I'm recording, of course, Evan just wants to say, can you say hi to everybody? No. Okay. All right, you go play, all right? I'm almost done. Goodness. All right. That's Evan. He's our youngest. All right. So what everybody gets wrong on the exam is it deals with this. Like when you bring a lawsuit, the first thing that you do is you file a complaint. And that complaint is just a piece of paper that says on it complaint, and then it has a number of paragraphs about who the parties are, what the law is, what the damage was. That's the complaint. It's a fairly simple document, and you have to file that with the court first, right? So the first thing you do is you take a complaint and file it with the court that you've decided to bring the lawsuit in. Okay. Once you filed that, the court makes a copy, gives you a copy, and then you have to take a summons. And what you do is you take the summons and the complaint and you deliver that to the defendant. Usually you'll have somebody else do this for you. Like usually it isn't the plaintiff that delivers this, and it's somebody that is a server. What we call them servers, and they are the people that take the complaint and the summons and takes that to the individual. The summons, by the way, it's just a piece of paper that says you've been sued. We're going to set. You have sorry. It'll say something like you have this long to respond to this complaint. All right, that's the summons. And so again, so first things first, you take the complaint and you file it with the court. Then you take a copy of the complaint along with a summons and have that delivered to the defendant. Anyway, funny story about this. Some states say that you have to deliver this by hand. Others are now allowing electronic delivery, like email. But I think the best story that I've ever heard was one that my civil procedure teacher told me about this, and she said a while back. What is his name? Donny Osmond. All right. My mom would be so mad that I didn't know Donny Osmond's name. Donny Osmond, very famous LDS guy from, I don't know, 40 years ago, and a singer. And he got sued. And at the time, he had this show with his sister called the Donny and Marie Show. And he was wealthy, and his house had high gates, and it was just difficult to get in touch with him or like get to see him. Well, he was getting sued, and so the server got this and said, "Oh, I got to take this to Donny Osmond." Good gracious! And he couldn't get a hold of him, and he couldn't find him until he realized, like, oh, he's got a show, a live show. I think it was a live show, and so this server got tickets to the Donny and Marie Show. And as part of the show, there was this one part where they're like up on the stage and everybody's invited to like dance and just have fun on the show or whatever. So the server gets up and he's like dancing across the stage. And as he gets near Donny Osmond, he hands him the documents and he's like, "Here, you've been served." And then like dances off on TV. That's just a great story. All right. So once you've been sued, now at that point, let's just stick with Donny. Donny can respond to that. He can deny all of the allegations in the complaint. He can offer a settlement with the person that's suing him. That you have a lot of options. The worst thing to do is just ignore it, because, like I said earlier in this lecture, if you ignore it, the party that's suing you can get a default judgment, meaning you didn't show up, so we're gonna enter a default judgment against you, and that just means you lose. Like you lose, and the court basically agrees with whatever the plaintiff said. And if you lose $1 million, then the sheriff can get documentation to come to start grabbing your stuff, cars, whatever else, selling it, and using that to pay off the person that sued you. So always respond to these things, even if you think it's a bogus claim. All right. So yeah, that's taking a case to court. Now let's share this again. Oh, watch this next video. So the next slide up is the one that says depositions. Before you get to court, so you've sued somebody, you filed the complaint, they filed the answer. At that point, you go into the discovery phase. And what this means is you can ask for documents from the other side. They can ask documents from you. You share what exhibits that you're going to use in court. That's when all of this happens. Now, depositions are interesting because it's basically getting testimony beforehand. You can depose the other party, ask them questions, and it's a great way to see what their legal arguments are going to be, like how they deal with all of this. Now, the video that I have linked on the deposition slide is classic. This really happened. And you might recognize the actors in this. So these are actors, but they're reading verbatim or speaking verbatim from the deposition transcript. So everything that they're saying is what was said in an actual deposition. And you'll see it's just absolutely silly. But most depositions that I've been in have been fairly contentious and tempers run high. And I've seen two attorneys that I think are just great people, but they said they were going to take it outside, and they went out and they were going to fight or something. Absolutely silly. But again, watch that video. I think it's a great look into what an actual deposition looks like. Okay. And then the next one, let me get back up into the slides here. Okay, so the next slide, you probably have this open, but I'll throw it up just in case. So here you've got the actual trial. When the trial starts, you start out with this thing called voir dire or voir dire. I've heard it pronounced every way. I don't speak Latin or whatever that is, so I don't care how you pronounce it, but that is the process of picking jurors. And so when on the first day of the trial, you spend usually about the whole first day picking the jury and who's going to be on the jury. And I actually had the privilege of doing this just recently. I'm on jury duty right now here in Rexburg, in the state courthouse that I make fun of so much. I'm on jury there until July of 2020. And I got called in one day. There was going to be a jury trial. It was a child molestation case or assault case, something terrible, right? And there were about 60 of us that were on the jury pool. And the way that this works is the court will just pick a random, not like 30 of you out of the group, and you go up. All right, here, stay over there. Can you go get Jess to help you? There you go.
I can do the arms.
All right, you can do the arms. All right, have fun, bud. And shut the door too. And yeah, they picked 30 of us, and I was one of the 30, so I ended up over in the jury pool. And then they spend the next couple hours just asking everybody on the jury pool questions about themselves, what they do for a living. Do they know the parties to this lawsuit? Do they have any biases that would keep them from being objective in their decisions here in the case? And all of that's interesting because, right, like with my case, it was a child that was the complaint was that this child had been molested by an older person. And so there was one woman sitting next to me, and she said, I was abused as a child. I don't think that I can be objective here. And the judge said, I agree, like, you're dismissed. And that just happened kind of over and over and over again with lots of people until you kind of whittled this group down. And at that point, each party, the plaintiff and the defendant, gets to kick others off of the jury pool until you're left with 12 people on the jury. And I wasn't one of them, so I didn't get paid. I got kicked off by the prosecution, and so I wasn't on that jury. But again, that's voir dire. Now, witnesses are called during the trial. They're sworn in, promise to tell the truth, and they will give testimony during the trial. Motions just mean like you'll file motions throughout the trial, motions to exclude evidence, motions. Let's just leave it at that. And at the end, if you lose, then you have the ability to appeal. And here I should probably go back to our whiteboard just so that you can remember how these things work. You've got, if you file a lawsuit and you're here at the local court here, that's not a good courthouse. That's a worse courthouse. All right, but it's the courthouse in Rexburg, so let's put Christmas lights all over it. All right, that's how you'll know that this is the Rexburg courthouse. Well, if you lose that, this is the trial court. If you lose that, then you'll go to the the Court of Appeals. And if you lose that, then you'll go to the, how do we make this look extra nice? Okay, I don't know what I just drew, but that is the Supreme Court of Idaho. So Idaho has its own Supreme Court. There it is. So yeah, with this, that's how it works. And it's the same with federal court. You go from they call it the district court to the circuit court. And the district court, that's the one here in Pocatello. The circuit court is in San Francisco, because we're in the 9th. Here in Idaho, we're the, oh, I accidentally deleted that. But we're in the 9th Circuit Court of Appeals here in Idaho. And if you lose there, then you can appeal up to the Supreme Court of the United States, because it's the federal court. In state, you'll go through the district court here, the Idaho local state court. You can, and actually from there, you can actually appeal to the Supreme Court of Idaho. But if you lose that in the Supreme Court of Idaho, you can actually appeal to the Supreme Court of the United States in DC. You probably won't get picked. Like 0.01% of appeals that want to go to the Supreme Court get picked. That's not an exact number, by the way, but it's very rare to get the US Supreme Court to take your case. All right, so that's the appeals slide. So if we go to slide 14, watch this video as well. This slide goes over like how to settle disputes without going through a jury trial or having a judge hear your case. And the first one is just negotiation. This is how I've made my legal practice work, is I just negotiate things. And you saw this with the Detroit, the Michigan guy, right? It's expensive to go to court, so I'd rather not do it. So I'd rather just settle. And you do that through negotiation. And this has kind of a fun clip from Suits where it shows Mike. If you haven't started Suits yet or don't know what I'm talking about, Mike is this young guy on the screen right now, and he didn't go to law school, but he gets hired at a law firm, and his boss Harvey is going to fire him, and Mike negotiates his way to stay in the firm. And then Harvey actually likes what Mike did, and so you'll see Mike go to his boss and negotiate a raise, basically. So kind of it's a fun one, and it's a clip where nobody swears, and so I can share it in my classes. So. All right, mediation. Mediation is kind of it's an informal, if you have one party that's going to listen and offer suggestions, but it's not binding or anything like that, that's mediation. As opposed to arbitration, which is more formal and almost looks like a trial, that's arbitration. All right, let's cut it off now. And yeah, let's not share the screen. I cancel that. Okay, just cut that out. That's all you need to know about civil procedure. And so, yeah, it's been fun. Sorry that my kids interrupted a couple times. I'll see you next video.